Welcome to my YouTube channel, Surowicz Watercolor. At any time during this video, if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, you can click on the icon in the lower right hand corner of the screen. This is the narrated step-by-step tutorial for my painting New England Roadside. The photograph on the right was a reference for this painting. My interpretation is less of a literal interpretation and more of a suggestive, expressive interpretation that focuses on value and light. I begin with a light pencil sketch using a B pencil. I'm working on 140-pound cold press watercolor paper, and I'm using a quarter sheet. It's 11 inches by 15 inches. I've sketched in the major elements of the building structure and have given just an indication of where some of the tree shapes are, but most of that will develop as the painting evolves. Before I begin the painting, let me go through the colors that I used. Cerulean blue, royal blue, raw sienna, raw umber, sap green, pyrrole red, and quinacridone burnt orange. While I have a variety of colors here, the painting is predominantly done with muted colors, so it's combinations of these colors that move these towards neutral, so the colors aren't going to be as obvious as you look at the painting. I'm going to begin by putting down a light wash that's a mixture of cerulean blue and raw sienna, and I'm using American Journey cerulean blue and raw sienna. I know that there's some combinations of some brands of those two colors that they get very green very quick, so you're going to have to experiment with exactly which paint you're using. But I use cerulean blue and raw sienna quite often for rocks, for skies, for trees, and I get pretty good results using these two colors. But right now it's a somewhat neutral wash that I'm putting down. It has accents of a light blue cool tone to it, and at the same time a little bit of warm raw sienna feel coming through in some spots. I'm using a 1-inch flat brush as I bring this wash down the page, and I'm working at about a 20-degree angle, so gravity's pulling that wash down, but it'll only go where I wet the paper because it's going to follow the path of least resistance, and that dry paper is going to resist the flow of the paint. So I can bring that wash down and control where it's going because I'm controlling where the moisture is, and I'm working with gravity to help bring that wash down my page and put down an even tone. As you can see, I'm not worried about trying to copy the local color that's in the photograph. I'm not worried about painting the object so much in the photograph as I am the shapes, the larger shapes in my composition right now. I'm blocking in value, and I'm blocking in warm and cool colors. You can see that I've switched this mixture and leaned it more towards the raw sienna, so now I have some warm tones on this building. And you can see as this wash has been applied that even though that was a very light wash in the sky, it's still a shade darker than the pure white of the paper. You can see the areas where I've painted and the areas that I haven't painted, that there's just a slight difference in the value. Here I've thoroughly dried my paper, and you can see the subtle changes in value and color temperature. And I did all that work pretty much working wet on dry. I started with dry paper and I put down a big wash using a 1-inch flat brush. Now my paper's dry, and I'm going to apply a wash around some of these shapes, and I'm going to begin doing some wet and wet work. So I'm starting here working wet on dry as I put this initial wash down of this green tone, but now I'm going to start working wet and wet. You can see I've started to introduce a darker value into this initial wash. The mixture that I'm using there is sap green with pyrrole red. So I've used the pyrrole red to neutralize the sap green and make it a more earthy color. I'm also putting in some touches of raw umber, and to get it really dark at some point I'll use a little bit of royal blue. but most of what I'm using right now is a mixture of sap green, pyrrole red, and I put a lighter wash, more of a middle value down, and I started to drop some more color, some darker values into there. And if you look, you can start to see some subtle hints of a red tone. If you look at the right of that wash there, a little middle value area, it's a redder tone than what I have closer to the building structure. And even at the bottom of that wash, you can see it gets red. What I didn't want to do is just have a flat wash. I wanted to have some variation moving from green to red, so I vary the ratio in my mixture and let it mingle also on the paper. And here I'm just taking a scraper while it's still damp and just roughing up that edge a little bit to make it a little bit more natural, not a hard edge that was created by the brush. I started my washes with a 1-inch flat brush, and I just switched to a 1/2-inch flat brush to do that tree on the right side there, that dark value shape that I just did. But I'm going to switch back to my 1-inch flat brush because I'm doing a larger area here, and I just can get better coverage using the 1-inch flat brush here. On the side, when I was putting that wash in, it was a bit of a tight area. I could still use a big brush if I wanted, but I do quite a bit of my initial wash application using either the 1-inch flat brush or the 1/2-inch flat brush. And now I've gone back to the 1/2-inch flat brush because I have that area wet now, and I'm just going to put in some touches of color and let that mingle with the water on the page. And it's going to give me a nice soft edge. So this is just suggesting this tree back here. I'm not trying to render a tree by any means. I'm just trying to suggest that it's back there. And as I go through my painting process, I'll add a little bit of texture and value to that. This is a good time to be working wet and wet. I can come in and drop in some dark value and get some nice subtle gradation and mingling of values within that shape that I've put down. And I'm going to take my scraper again and I'm just break that up a little bit and create some hard edge textures within the soft washes that I have going on. So this is just suggestive of this large area of tree that's kind of behind this house. And even though my board is tilted, my paper is dry on the building structure, so it's going to resist the flow of the paint. Remember that the paint will seek the path of least resistance. So it's going to flow around that dry shape and start to puddle where it starts to get caught in between the angles of the dry paper. And there's where I'll have to take my brush and pick up a little bit of that moisture, because eventually if I let it sit too long, it's going to start to cause a backwash. And there I got a little bit of a little too green with the paint. I picked up some pure pigment there, and I'll tone that down a little bit by putting some more red into that. Now I'm going to go back to my 1-inch brush, and I'm going to put a wash of water down on my page here in this area that's going to be the bushes and shrubs that are in front of this building. And I work with 2 water containers, one for dirty and one for clean water. So I want to have clean water when I wet the paper to do a wash, to work wet and wet. So right now I'm working wet and wet, and I'm taking the same mixture that I was using in the other areas that I've put down, those darker values, the pyrrole red with the sap green, and I'm just being suggestive with the wash I'm putting down, just to suggest the trees and the shrubs. There's a couple bushes that have these kind of arcing branches, and I want to capture the curve of those branches kind of reaching out, extending out, and hanging down. And I'll do that as I develop this. So right now this is all wet and wet. I'll go ahead and put the reference photo in the top right corner there so you can kind of see these shapes that I'm trying to capture. If you look at that photograph, you see that on the left-hand side there's this big shrub that has these long kind of arcing branches that come out of it, shoot out of the ground almost, and the same farther back in front of the back structure there's another one of those bushes. So I'm trying to capture the feeling of that and just suggest that arcing shrub. But you can see that I'm not picking out every little plant, trying to paint individual plants. I'm just trying to suggest some of these shapes, and give some indication of mass working wet and wet. I'm going to take my scraping tool and break these shapes up a little bit and help further suggest what's going on here, that these are some bushes and some shrubs with some branches. And right now is a good time to do this because the paper is damp, so when I scrape it, the paint doesn't rush back in. If my paper was too saturated, that paint would flow back in, but right now it's the right time to do this, so I can just be a little more expressive in what I'm doing here, just using this scraper. Most of what I've done so far has been working in the light to middle value range, although I'm a little darker on the right hand side there. Now I'm going to start to get a little darker with my value and start to help define where the light's hitting and where some of the areas are cast in shadow. So I'm using my 1/2 inch flat brush once again, and I'm putting a wash. It's still a warm wash for the most part on the shadowed side of the building. So this mixture has some raw sienna, it has some sap green, it has a little bit of quinacridone and burnt orange in it, and I'm just bringing that wash down, and I'm stopping around some of those areas where I did the wet and wet brush work to suggest the shrubs there. So this is going to help to start to define a little bit more that there's a bush or a plant, some shrubs there. So I'm going to paint the shadow side of this other part of the structure back here. I've got a little bit of raw umber in this mixture. And you see I'm still using just a 1/2 inch flat brush. And these are just shapes that I'm painting right now, shapes of value. And I'm not picking out windows and gutters or things like that at this stage. I'm still trying to put down some value patterns. I'm going to switch to a number 4 round brush, and I'm going to do some smaller brush work here. I'm still not trying to pick out individual objects. I'm just painting in some shadowed areas that are underneath gutters and overhangs of the roof, and help start to define the building structures here a little bit more, start to contour some of the surfaces. If you look at the left side of the reference photo, there's a tree that starts to break into the composition. And I think I'm going to put that in there. I'm putting down a wash of clear water, and then I'm just going to touch some color into there. And you need to be careful when you have a tree that's right on the edge, and it creates a tangent. You need to be careful that you don't split something down the middle and have a trunk that's half on and half off. It just doesn't look right. But in this case, I think it works. It's just a slight indication of something breaking into the composition, and I like how it breaks that shape up between the building and the edge of the composition. So I'm going to go ahead and put that in there, and that's something I don't do that often. I either normally have the tree about 3/4 in the composition, or I don't have it in the composition at all. Now I'm going to paint the rooftops here, and I've switched to a quill brush. This is a brush that I like. It has a fine point but holds quite a bit of paint. And I'm using a mixture that's a combination still of sap green, pyro red, but it also has royal blue in it to darken that value, and some quinacridone and burnt orange to help neutralize that blue so it's not a strong blue coming through it all. And there's going to be some subtle variation in this wash. It'll be hard to see on the camera, but I'll be shifting that hue a little bit from warm to cool a little bit within this dark value. And this value I'll carry from this rooftop right over to the other rooftop, and the shapes are just going to run right together. Now I'm going to complete the wash on this rooftop here, and then I'm going to carry this value right into the other rooftop. Even though they're two separate structures and two separate rooftops, I'm treating them as they're actually one shape. This quill brush I find to be a very versatile brush. I can use it about just about every angle and create a variety of brush strokes and get a variety of coverage. I don't know if you can tell though, sometimes as I did just there, I have the brush actually on its side and I drag it sideways to cover a larger area, and then I go to a point like right here to get a finer brush stroke. Right there I'm actually dragging, I have the handle perpendicular to my brush stroke, and I'm getting a wide application of paint as opposed to just using the tip. So here you can see I can get a nice coverage, but I can also get a nice fine point with it. I'm going to be working with a quill brush still, and giving an indication of some of these windows on the structure. And I'm using the same combinations of colors, the royal blue with some quinacridone and burnt orange, some touches of pyro red and some sap green in them, and at times a little raw sienna. Very subtle changes within the wash itself that are hard to see on the camera, but I'm just working with neutral colors here, and using them across the composition so it has a nice harmony to it. And you can see that from time to time I'll apply the paint, and then I'll just blot it softly with a tissue. That I like the patterns it creates and the variation of value, and it lightens it up in some areas. And in this case, I don't want to have a real strong contrast on the side of this building. It's kind of in shadow, and I want it to differ a little bit from the area where there's still white of the paper, and there's going to be very strong contrast. So here, there's a little bit of a window there, and it's blocked mostly by that shrub. So I'm just going to give just a slight indication that there's something there. I have some hard edges and some right angles, so you know it's not the bush. It's a little darker value. But it also helps reinforce the suggestion that there is a shrub or a bush there, because it doesn't continue down, and it's blocked by what appears to be a lighter value. And you have to plan for that in watercolor, because if you're working transparent as I do, you can't come back with white paint and lighten up that area in front of that window later on. You have to use the white of the paper, the reflected light. So you have to plan those types of things. Now I'm going to use a number 4 round brush. This is a Aqua Elite made by Princeton Brush Company. It's a synthetic sable, but it's a nice brush. It doesn't cost as much as a sable, but it performs very well. Has a nice point, it keeps quite a bit of paint. And I'm painting these windows here on this the side of the building that has the light shining on it. It's pure white of the paper, so I'm going to get some strong contrast here. And I've actually added a little bit more of the royal blue to this mixture here that I'm using, so the ratio is shifted more towards the cool side. And where what I was using on the side there in that shadowed area was a warmer tone. And I'm not trying to noodle out every aspect of the windows. I'm just giving a suggestion. There's some windows there. There's some value to help define the shapes. There's a little bit of positive and negative painting going on. And then I'll do some calligraphy type brushwork with just some line and dots and dashes, just to give a suggestion of some of the molding that goes around these windows. And here there's a door that's got a warm tone to it, kind of a reddish orange. So I'm going to put that in there and then come back in with a little bit of a darker mixture to let it mingle there in that shape. But it helps carry some of that warm tone to that part of the composition. And I have that warm, cool play going on throughout the painting, but trying to keep a nice balance. I'm staying with a slightly cooler mixture here as I do the windows in this shadowed area. I want to differentiate them a little bit in space from those windows that are in shadow there as compared to the ones that are more in the foreground and the shadowed side of this other part of the building structure. So it helps build the relationship spatially between those two areas. And then here again, a little farther back, I have another side of the building that's catching the full light, so it's white, and I have the dark value, but it's not going to be quite as strong in contrast as what I have here, a little closer to us. There's a chimney up top here, and it's got a red tone to it. I'm going to pick that up here by putting down some quinacridone burnt orange, and that helps echo that warm orange red that I had in that doorway on the side of the building that I just painted. So I'm going to put a little darker value on the left, and it blends right into the roof, but it's an orange tone on the side that's sunlit. I don't like the edge that I have here, so I want to clean that up a little bit. I'm going to put some rice tape down, and I'm going to take a magic eraser, and I'm going to lift some of that paint. So the magic eraser is saturated with water, and I'm going to rub in between the two pieces of tape I put down and blot it with a tissue and clean some of that paint up, clean that edge up, so it's a better edge. I have two sides of these buildings that are cast in shadow, and one's closer to us, one's a little further back. I want to differentiate them a little bit more because they're pretty much the same. So I'm going to take a mixture here that's a little cooler, still using the same colors that I've been using all along, but this one's shifted a little bit more towards the blue. And I'm going to put a light gradation of a wash here in this area to help differentiate it from this other side of a building that's cast in shadow. So I put it right there against the pure white paper, and it helps strengthen the contrast there. And then I softened it and gradated it out with clear water. I'm going to put some middle value cool washes down. If you look as I do some of this brushwork, the angle of my brush and how I vary the pressure to go from a fine point sometimes to a little bit of broader stroke. So I can use the point and paint as most often people do, but I can also change the angle so that it's perpendicular to my brush stroke, and I can get a fairly broad application if I want. Here I'm just doing a little calligraphy using line to help define some of the edges. Normally when I'm doing this type of brushwork, I don't outline things. I use a lot of broken lines just to give the suggestion of edges. Right now I'm still working with a cool middle value, and you can see just some short lines, some longer lines, some dots. And then if I want to put a wash in, I can do that still with this brush. And here's where I was dragging it on the side perpendicular to my brush stroke to give me a large area of coverage. See, you can see here a little broader application, and still using the same brush. Just a few dots, dashes, some lines, just to indicate there's something there, some molding that's wrapping this window. Now, working with the same brush, but it's damp now. Before it was fairly saturated. Now it's damp, and I'm using the side of the brush and dragging it really as the handle perpendicular to my brush stroke. Then I'll use the tip to help shore up some edges. But I'm just being very suggestive and expressive, trying to capture this shrub that has these branches that kind of swing up and over. And you can see I'm not taking a little tiny brush and trying to render 10,000 leaves. I'm just being very suggestive and expressive in my brush strokes, start to show some of that curved linear motion being created by this shrub. And then I'll just take my tip and put just a few touches there, but a lot of kind of a damp to low moisture brush work there in a motion that suggests that shrub is there. And then at the bottom, just taking the tip and giving a little bit of an edge there to help ground it. And there's another one of these over here. So I'm doing the same type of thing, just being very suggestive, very expressive. I'm not trying to render the bush. Now I want to capture a couple of the smaller plants that are here. So you can see this same type of brushwork, mostly being created by the texture of the paint that's being applied. Now, and then very low moisture brush here, just light touches to give a little texture to this wash that was put in earlier in the painting process. This just suggests that there's some leaves, some branches there. Same here on the left hand side. Just very slightly. It's not a lot, it just gives a light texture, kind of a hard edge pattern in those softer shapes. I want a little darker value in these windows here on this side of the building. I want to pick up that contrast a little bit. So I'm using my number 4 Aqua Elite round brush just to do some of this brush work here. And I'm using a cool mixture. Now I'm going to take a number 1 rigger brush, and I'm just going to indicate some branches here. Not a lot, just again very subtle, just enough to make the viewer aware that there are some linear shapes here that suggest that there's branches in this tree. And they're not, again, not a solid line. They're broken up. These are broken lines. They start, they stop to suggest that there's leaves covering them and whatnot. I'm going to do the same down here, just help further define or suggest these shrubs by putting some arcing branches in here along with the textures that I've put in earlier. So now I have some line to complement the textures, and those work together, those two elements, to help suggest that there's a bush or a shrub or some kind of plant there. Now I'm going to put a white mat around this so you can get a good look at it without the tape and the board. And there's my painting, New England Roadside. I hope you enjoyed this. If you haven't already, be sure to click the subscribe button or sign up for my mailing list to receive the latest updates and information about my videos and other online instruction.